The wind howled through the narrow streets of Boston's North End like a wounded animal. It was the kind of cold that cut through fabric and flesh, settling deep into the bones. November had arrived with a vengeance, bringing with it rain that fell in sheets so thick it blurred the city lights into watercolor smears against the night sky. Emily Carter pressed herself against the cracked plastic of the bus stop shelter, her arms wrapped tightly around her body. The thin cotton shirt she wore, once white, now a dingy grey, offered no protection against the storm. Her jeans were soaked through, clinging to her legs like a second skin of ice. She had no jacket, no umbrella, no money for either. 3 weeks ago, she'd had an apartment in Cambridge, a modest studio near the university where she'd worked as an administrative assistant. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Then came the layoffs. Budget cuts, they'd called it. 20 people gone in a single afternoon, including her. The rent was due 2 weeks later. She couldn't pay it. The eviction notice came fast, brutal in its efficiency. Now she had a duffel bag with her remaining possessions at a women's shelter in Dorchester, and she spent her days walking the city, looking for work, any work. The shelters had rules. You had to be out by 7 in the morning, couldn't return until 6 in the evening. So she walked, she applied, she waited, and she tried not to think about how quickly a life could unravel. Tonight she'd stayed too late at the public library, trying to stretch out her time in the warmth while applying to jobs on their computers. When she finally left, the storm had already begun. She'd missed the last bus that would take her to the shelter. The next wouldn't come for another 40 minutes. Emily's teeth chattered violently. She could no longer feel her fingers. The few people who passed by hurried along, heads down, collars up, moving from one warm place to another. No one looked at her. In a city like Boston, the homeless and the desperate had a way of becoming invisible. She closed her eyes, trying to conserve what little warmth remained in her body. Maybe, if she stayed very still, made herself very small, she could survive until the bus came. That's when she heard it, the low, powerful purr of an expensive engine. Emily opened her eyes to see a black luxury sedan pulling to the curb directly in front of the bus stop. The car was immaculate. A Mercedes, she thought, though she knew little about cars. Its windows were tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. For a moment, it simply idled there, exhaust pluming white in the cold air. She tensed. In her 3 weeks on the streets, she'd learned that expensive cars, stopping near vulnerable women, rarely meant anything good. But then, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out into the rain. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emily had made in 3 months at her old job. Despite the downpour, he moved with unhurried confidence, as if the weather was merely an inconvenience he'd chosen to acknowledge. His dark hair was slicked back, rain already beading on the fabric of his shoulders. Emily couldn't see his face clearly. The streetlight was behind him, casting his features in shadow, but she could feel his gaze. It was heavy, assessing, the way a jeweler might examine a stone to determine its worth. Without a word, the man reached back into his car. When his hand emerged, he held a coat. Not a raincoat, but a heavy wool overcoat, the kind that spoke of old money and European tailors. It was charcoal grey, almost black, with a subtle sheen that caught what little light penetrated the storm. He walked toward her. Emily's heart hammered. She pressed herself harder against the shelter wall, muscles coiled to run despite having nowhere to go. But the man didn't reach for her. He didn't speak. He simply opened the coat with both hands and, with a movement almost gentle, draped it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. The coat still held his body heat, and it enveloped her like an embrace. It smelled of expensive cologne, something with notes of cedar and bergamot, and beneath that, something uniquely masculine, clean, powerful. Emily looked up at him, shock rendering her speechless. In that brief moment she caught a glimpse of his face, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes God, those eyes, dark and intense, holding something she couldn't name. Not pity, not kindness exactly. Something else, something that made her breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. Then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he turned and walked back to his car. Emily found her voice. "Wait, I can't—" But he was already behind the wheel. The door closed with the solid thunk of German engineering. The car pulled away from the curb, its taillights disappearing into the storm like red embers swallowed by darkness. She stood there, stunned, the coat heavy and warm around her shoulders. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. Strangers didn't do things like this, not in Boston, not anywhere. People didn't give away coats that probably cost thousands of dollars to homeless women at bus stops, unless they wanted something, unless it was a mistake. Emily's hands trembled as she pulled the coat tighter around herself. She should take it off, she thought, should leave it on the bench. This was too much, too expensive, too strange. But God, it was so warm. Her fingers, finally beginning to thaw, explored the coat's interior. The lining was silk, smooth as water, and there, near the inside breast pocket, her fingertips encountered something different. A texture, raised fabric. She angled herself toward the streetlight and opened the coat to look. Embroidered into the silk lining in gold thread was a symbol. A lion, regal and fierce, its mane flowing like flames. Above its head sat a crown, detailed and ornate. Beneath it, a single word in stylized script, De Laurentiis. Emily's blood went cold, and it had nothing to do with the weather. She knew that name. Everyone in Boston knew that name, even if they pretended not to. It was whispered in certain neighborhoods, spoken with fear in others, and never, ever mentioned in polite company. The De Laurentiis family, the most powerful crime organization in New England. They controlled everything from the waterfront to the Back Bay. Drugs, gambling, protection, legitimate businesses that laundered dirty money until it gleamed. They were ghosts and gods all at once, operating in shadows while owning half the city, and Matteo De Laurentiis was their king. Emily had never seen him. Men like that didn't show their faces in public, but she'd heard the stories. Everyone had. He was ruthless, calculating, a man who'd built an empire on fear and violence. People who crossed him disappeared. Businesses that didn't pay tribute burned. He was, by all accounts, not someone whose coat you wanted to be wearing. She looked down the empty street, suddenly feeling very exposed. Had it been him, the man in the storm? It couldn't be. Men like Matteo De Laurentiis had drivers. They didn't pull over in the rain to help freezing women. But then why was his family crest embroidered into this coat? The bus arrived with a hydraulic hiss, its doors opening to reveal blessed warmth and fluorescent light. Emily climbed aboard, fumbling for the change she'd been saving. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, waved her off. "Get yourself warm, honey." Emily found a seat near the back and sat down heavily, the coat still wrapped around her. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched Boston slide by, the old brick buildings of the North End giving way to the more modern glass and steel of downtown, then the grittier neighborhoods beyond. She should get rid of the coat. First thing tomorrow, she should take it to a police station or leave it somewhere it would be found. Keeping it was dangerous. Everything about this situation screamed danger, but even as she thought it, Emily knew she wouldn't. Not yet. Not while the cold still lived in her bones and the threat of another night in the freezing rain loomed ahead. Just for tonight, she told herself. Just until the storm passed. She had no way of knowing that by accepting the coat, by letting its warmth seep into her skin, she'd crossed an invisible line. In Matteo De Laurentiis' world, such gestures weren't random acts of kindness. They were claims, marks of ownership, and he always collected what was his. What happens when Emily discovers the true meaning of wearing the De Laurentiis coat? Will she return it? Or is it already too late? Stay tuned for Chapter 2 to find out. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what happens next. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow cot in the shelter, the coat folded carefully beside her, and stared at the water-stained ceiling tiles. Around her, 40 other women breathed and shifted in their sleep, the room filled with quiet sounds of survival, snores, whimpers, the occasional cry of a bad dream. She'd checked the coat a dozen times before lights out, running her fingers over that golden emblem, as if it might somehow change, might reveal itself to be something innocent. But it remained the same. A lion, a crown, a name that carried weight. When morning came at 6, forcing everyone out into the grey dawn, Emily put the coat on again. She had no choice. Her thin shirt was still damp, and the November cold showed no signs of relenting. But she kept the collar turned up and her head down, suddenly aware of how distinctive the coat was, how visible it made her. She spent the morning at the library again, applying to jobs with numb fingers and a distracted mind. Every time someone walked past, she tensed. Every time the door opened, she looked up, half expecting to see men in dark suits coming for her. But no one came. Hours passed. The coat remained just a coat. By afternoon, Emily had almost convinced herself she'd been paranoid. So it was a Mafia family's coat. That didn't mean anything. Maybe it had been stolen. Maybe the emblem was fake, some kind of knockoff meant to look expensive. Maybe the man who'd given it to her had no idea what he was handing over. Maybe she was safe. She left the library at 4, intending to walk to a soup kitchen in Roxbury that served dinner early. The coat kept her warm as she made her way through the streets, and for the first time in weeks she didn't feel that bone-deep cold that made every step an effort. The neighborhood she was passing through was one she usually avoided, too close to the North End, too close to territory everyone knew belonged to organized crime. But the coat had made her careless, comfortable. She took a shortcut down a narrow street lined with old brownstones, their windows glowing warm in the gathering dusk. That's when she heard the engines. Deep, powerful, approaching fast. Emily looked back over her shoulder and felt her heart stop. 3 black SUVs were turning onto the street, moving in formation like sharks, Cadillac Escalades, windows tinted black, chrome gleaming. They were coming straight toward her. Emily's survival instincts kicked in. She started walking faster, then jogging, looking for a cross street, an alley, anywhere to disappear. But the SUVs accelerated, closing the distance with frightening speed. The lead vehicle pulled ahead, cutting her off. The other 2 boxed her in from behind and the side. She was trapped in a triangle of black metal and dark glass, the engines still running, exhaust plumes rising in the cold air. For a long moment, nothing happened. Emily stood frozen, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with the running. This was it. This was how it ended. She'd taken something that didn't belong to her, and now men with guns were going to drag her into one of those vehicles, and she'd never be seen again. The statistics flashed through her mind. How many people disappeared in Boston each year? How many bodies turned up in the harbor or buried in construction sites? She'd be one more. A nobody. A homeless woman no one would miss. Then the driver's door of the lead SUV opened. A man stepped out. Not the man from last night. This one was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair. He wore an expensive suit and moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. Behind him, doors opened on the other vehicles. More men emerged. 4, 5, 6. All dressed similarly, all watching her with the same flat, professional gaze. The silver-haired man approached slowly, his hands visible, palms out. A gesture meant to be non-threatening, though Emily knew better. She'd seen nature documentaries where predators moved just like this before the final strike. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was cultured, Boston accent softened by education, but not entirely erased. "My name is Vincent Moretti. I work for Mr. De Laurentiis. He'd like to speak with you." Emily's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I didn't steal it. The coat. Someone gave it to me. I didn't know." "We know," Vincent interrupted gently. "You're not in trouble, Miss Carter. Mr. De Laurentiis simply wishes to speak with you. Please." He gestured toward the open door of the SUV. Every instinct Emily possessed screamed at her to run, but she was surrounded, outmatched, and some part of her, the part that had been studying these men's faces, recognized that they weren't here to hurt her. Not yet, anyway. There was no menace in their postures, no weapons visible. If they'd wanted to simply take her, they would have. The fact that they were asking, that this Vincent was being polite, meant something. She just didn't know what. "Do I have a choice?" she asked. Vincent's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "There's always a choice, Miss Carter, but I think you'll want to hear what Mr. De Laurentiis has to say." Emily looked at the SUV, then back at the street behind her. Freedom lay in that direction. She could run, maybe lose them in the maze of Boston's neighborhoods, maybe make it to a police station, or maybe she'd just be delaying the inevitable. Besides, some reckless part of her, the part that had been beaten down by 3 weeks of desperation and cold, wanted to know, wanted to understand what last night had meant, why a man had given her his coat, what happened next. She walked to the SUV. Vincent held the door as she climbed in. The interior was warm, leather seats heated to the perfect temperature. It smelled of expensive cars and even more expensive cologne. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing her in. Vincent climbed into the front passenger seat. The driver, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, put the vehicle in gear. The other SUVs fell into formation around them, one ahead, two behind, and the convoy began moving through the streets of Boston. No one spoke. Emily sat in the back seat, her hands clenched in her lap, the coat suddenly feeling very heavy. Through the windows, she watched the city pass by. They were heading north, into the older, wealthier parts of Boston. The buildings grew more elegant, the cars parked on the streets more expensive. They drove for 20 minutes, eventually turning onto a private road that wound up Beacon Hill. At the end sat a mansion. Not a house, a mansion. 4 stories of federal-style architecture, all red brick and white columns, with a circular driveway and professionally landscaped grounds. Lights glowed in nearly every window, making the place look like something from a painting. The SUVs pulled to a stop in front of the main entrance. Doors opened. Vincent stepped out first, then held the door for Emily. "This way, please." She followed him up the marble steps to a front door that probably cost more than her parents' entire house back in Ohio. It opened before they reached it, held by a man in a suit who nodded respectfully as they passed. Inside, the mansion was everything Emily had imagined and more. Hardwood floors polished to a mirror shine, crown molding and wainscoting that spoke of centuries of wealth. Original artwork on the walls, pieces she thought she recognized from art history classes, though surely those were reproductions. Surely no one kept actual Caravaggios in their home. But looking at Vincent's expression, utterly unsurprised by the splendor, Emily realized with a chill that maybe they did. They climbed a curved staircase to the second floor, walked down a hallway lined with more art, and stopped before a set of double doors. Vincent knocked once. "Come in," said a voice from inside, deep, controlled, utterly calm. Vincent opened the doors and gestured for Emily to enter. She stepped through, and he closed the doors behind her, leaving her alone in what appeared to be a study. The room was masculine and sophisticated, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace crackling with real wood, leather chairs arranged for conversation. But Emily barely registered any of it, because standing by the window, silhouetted against the lights of Boston spread out below, was the man from the storm. She recognized him instantly, though she hadn't seen his face clearly that night. Something in the way he stood, the way he held himself with absolute certainty. He was still wearing a suit, though he'd removed the jacket and rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with what looked like old scars. He turned to face her, and Emily's breath caught. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe. His features were sharp and aristocratic, the kind of bone structure that would have made him handsome, even without the dark intensity in his eyes. Those eyes, black in this light, fixed on her with the same assessing gaze she'd felt during the storm. "Miss Carter," he said, moving away from the window, "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. Vincent can be overly cautious." His voice matched his appearance, cultured, controlled, with just a hint of the streets beneath the polish. This was a man who'd climbed from somewhere dark to reach this height, and hadn't forgotten where he came from. "You're Matteo De Laurentiis," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "I am." He gestured to one of the leather chairs. "Please sit. You've had a difficult few days." Emily didn't move. "Why am I here?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Direct, I appreciate that. You're here because you're wearing my coat." "I was going to return it," Emily said quickly. It's been cold and I didn't have... I'm not asking for it back." The statement hung in the air between them. Emily stared at him, confused. Matteo moved to a side table where crystal decanters held amber liquid. He poured himself 2 fingers of what looked like very expensive scotch, then glanced at her questioningly. She shook her head. "Do you know why I gave you that coat, Miss Carter?" he asked, taking a sip. "Because I was freezing? That's why I stopped. But it's not why I gave you that coat." He set his glass down and moved closer to her, not threatening but not casual either. "In my world, we have traditions, rules that aren't written down but everyone understands. One of those rules involves marks of protection." Emily's mouth had gone dry. "Protection? When someone in my family gives another person something that carries our name, our symbol, it means something. It means that person is under our care, that anyone who harms them answers to us." His eyes locked on hers. "The moment I placed that coat on your shoulders, Emily, you came under my protection." The use of her first name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold or fear. "I don't understand," she whispered. "It's simple. You're mine to protect now, mine to care for." "That's how it works." He paused. "And I take care of what's mine." Emily's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen. Mafia bosses didn't declare homeless women under their protection because of a coat. There had to be more to it. A catch, a price. "What do you want from me?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Matteo's expression shifted, something darker crossing his features. "I want you safe. I want you warm. I want you to stop sleeping in shelters where you could be hurt." He moved to his desk, pulled open a drawer and withdrew a key. "There's an apartment in the back bay, 2 bedrooms, fully furnished. It's yours." He held out the key. Emily stared at it like it might burn her. "I can't accept that." "You can, you will." "Why?" The word burst out of her, frustration and confusion and fear all tangled together. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." For the first time, Matteo's control seemed to slip. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice was rougher. "Last night, I was driving back from a meeting. It had gone badly. People had died. And I was thinking about all the ugliness in my life, all the violence and the blood and the calculations. Then I saw you." He stopped, seemed to gather himself. "You were trying so hard to be invisible, to not ask for help, to survive on your own. And I thought, here's someone who doesn't know who I am, doesn't know what I do, just a woman who's had bad luck and refuses to give up." He held out the key again. "Take it, Emily. Let me do this one good thing." Emily looked at the key, then at his face. Behind the hardness, behind the cold control, she saw something unexpected. Loneliness. A kind of desperate need to be something other than what he was, even if, just for a moment. Against every ounce of common sense she possessed, Emily reached out and took the key. The moment her fingers touched the metal, she saw something flare in Matteo's eyes. Satisfaction, possession, something darker that made her pulse quicken. "Good," he said softly. "Vincent will take you to the apartment. Your things from the shelter have already been collected. You'll find clothes in the closet, food in the refrigerator. A phone is on the kitchen counter. My number is programmed in. If you need anything, call." "I can't repay you for this," Emily said. "I'm not asking you to." "Then what happens now?" Matteo smiled, and it was a dangerous thing. Now you live your life. Find a new job. Get back on your feet. But you do it under my protection. That means you're safe. No one will touch you. No one will hurt you." He paused. "And it means you're mine, Emily. Not in the way you're thinking, but mine all the same. Do you understand?" Emily didn't. Not really. But she nodded anyway. Vincent was waiting outside the study. He drove her to an address in the back bay, to a building with a doorman and a marble lobby. The apartment was on the 8th floor, and it was nicer than anywhere Emily had ever lived. Modern kitchen, marble bathroom, windows overlooking the Charles River. It was perfect. It was terrifying. That night, Emily lay in a real bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and stared at the ceiling. The coat hung in the closet, but she could still feel its weight on her shoulders. She'd made a deal with the devil. Maybe not literally, but close enough. The only question was what price she'd eventually pay. Emily now has a new life, a new apartment, and the protection of Boston's most dangerous man. But what does it really mean to belong to Matteo De Laurentiis? Find out in Chapter 3. If you're hooked on this story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter. 2 weeks passed like a dream Emily was afraid to wake from. The apartment remained real each morning when she opened her eyes. The clothes in the closet, expensive, perfectly sized in colors that suited her, didn't disappear. The refrigerator stayed stocked with fresh food. The phone on the counter, sleek and new, held only one contact: Matteo. She didn't call him. She wasn't sure she'd know what to say if she did. Emily found a job in her 3rd day of searching, a receptionist position at a dental practice in Cambridge. The pay was modest, but it was honest work, and the hours were reasonable. She could make rent on a normal apartment with it, though of course she didn't need to. The apartment was hers, free and clear. One of several properties Matteo owned, she assumed, though she tried not to think too hard about how he'd acquired them. Life began to settle into a new normal. She took the T to work each morning, stopped for coffee at a shop that was becoming familiar, returned home each evening to the apartment that still didn't quite feel like hers. She was warm, fed, safe, and completely untethered from anything real. The coat hung in her closet, a dark reminder of how this had all started. She hadn't worn it since that first night, choosing instead from the jackets that had mysteriously appeared in her wardrobe. But she couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. Some superstitious part of her believed that as long as she kept the coat, Matteo's protection held. And if it were a talisman, instead of just expensive wool. On a Friday evening, 2 weeks after their meeting in his study, Emily's phone rang. She'd been making dinner, actually cooking, a luxury she'd almost forgotten. And the sound startled her. For a moment, she just stared at the device, watching Matteo's name flash on the screen. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Emily." His voice was exactly as she remembered, controlled, deep. "How are you settling in?" "Fine, good. The apartment it's more than I ever expected." "Good." A pause. "I'm calling because I have a favor to ask." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Here it comes, she thought. The price, the catch, whatever he really wanted from her all along. What kind of favor? "I have a business dinner tomorrow night, at Menton. It would be beneficial if I didn't attend alone." Another pause. "I'd like you to accompany me." Of all the things Emily had imagined he might ask, this wasn't on the list. "You want me to be your date?" "I want you to sit beside me at dinner and make pleasant conversation. Nothing more." "Why me?" "You must know dozens of women I know many women who want something from me." Matteo interrupted. "Money, status, connection to my power. You're the first person in a very long time who's asked for nothing." Emily moved to the window, looking out over the city. Lights were beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. "I've asked for plenty. An apartment, protection, a second chance. I offered those things. You didn't ask." His voice softened slightly. "Will you come?" She should say no. This was how it started, how you got pulled deeper into a world you couldn't escape. One dinner became two, then events, then expectations, then obligations, until you were so entangled you couldn't remember what freedom felt like. But Emily found herself saying, "What time?" "I'll have Vincent collect you at 7. The dress code is formal. There's a dress in your closet, third from the left. It will be appropriate." "You bought me a dress for this?" "I bought you a wardrobe. The dress happened to be in it." A hint of amusement colored his tone. 7 tomorrow, Emily." "Thank you." He disconnected before she could respond. Emily stood at the window for a long time after, watching darkness settle over Boston and wondering what she'd just agreed to. Vincent arrived at precisely 7 the next evening. Emily had spent 2 hours getting ready, trying on the dress 3 times, doing and redoing her makeup. She felt ridiculous, nervous as a teenager before prom. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. The dress was midnight blue, almost black, with a neckline that was modest but elegant. It hugged her figure without being inappropriate, and the fabric moved like water when she walked. Her hair, which had been growing shaggy during her weeks on the street, had been cut and styled at a salon that afternoon. Another mysterious appointment that had appeared on the phone's calendar. She looked like someone with money. Someone who belonged in expensive restaurants and black SUVs. She looked like she belonged to Matteo De Laurentiis. The drive to Menton took only 15 minutes. The restaurant was in Fort Point, a converted warehouse transformed into one of Boston's most exclusive dining destinations. Vincent pulled up to the valet station, and a moment later, Matteo was there, opening her door himself. Emily's breath caught. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than she'd make in a year, tailored to perfection. His dark hair was styled back, emphasizing the sharp planes of his face. But it was his eyes that stopped her, the way they took her in, a slow assessment that felt physical, like hands tracing her silhouette. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Emily accepted his offered hand and stepped out of the SUV. "So do you. Look good, I mean. Not beautiful. Well, maybe beautiful. I mean—" She stopped, mortified, but Matteo smiled. A real smile, not the controlled expression he usually wore. "Come," he said, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. "Let's eat." Inside, Menton was all understated elegance. Exposed brick and modern design, soft lighting and quiet conversation. The maitre d' recognized Matteo immediately, leading them not to the main dining room, but to a private area in the back. A table for 8, though only 4 seats were occupied. 3 men rose as they approached. All were older than Matteo. All wore expensive suits. All had the same watchful quality she'd seen in Vincent and his men. These were dangerous people, Emily realized. Whatever this dinner was, it wasn't purely social. "Gentlemen," Matteo said smoothly, "thank you for coming. This is Emily Carter. Emily, may I introduce Michael Russo, Thomas Chen, and David Castellano, associates of mine." Associates. The word carried weight in this context. Emily shook hands, smiled, made small talk while her mind raced. These men were part of Matteo's world, part of his organization, and she was sitting down to dinner with them like it was perfectly normal. The meal began. Courses arrived with perfect timing. Oysters, foie gras, perfectly seared scallops. The wine was French and probably illegal to export. Conversation flowed around topics that seemed innocent but weren't. Construction projects that were clearly fronts, shipping contracts that likely involved contraband, personnel changes that Emily suspected meant someone had disappeared. And through it all, Matteo kept her included. He touched her elbow when introducing a new topic, met her eyes when making a point, asked her opinion on things that had nothing to do with crime. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple, comfortable, connected. It was all performance, Emily knew. But something about the way Matteo's hand occasionally brushed hers, the way his attention never fully left her, even when discussing business, felt real. Midway through the main course, one of the men, Russo, leaned forward. You're a lucky woman, Miss Carter. Matteo doesn't bring guests to these dinners. I'm beginning to understand that, Emily said carefully. He must trust you. Russo's eyes were sharp, calculating. That's rare. I gave her my coat, Matteo said quietly. That should tell you everything you need to know about my level of trust. The table went silent. The other men exchanged glances that Emily couldn't interpret, but that clearly meant something significant. Chen cleared his throat. I see. Then she's under full protection. Nadi, full protection, Matteo confirmed. His hand moved under the table to rest on Emily's knee. The touch was warm, possessive. Anyone who touches her answers to me. I trust that's understood. Of course, all three men murmured. Emily felt like she was missing half the conversation. What did full protection mean in their world? What had Matteo just committed to by bringing her here, by making that statement in front of his associates? The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. By the time dessert arrived, some chocolate creation that probably had a French name Emily couldn't pronounce. She'd given up trying to follow the subtext and simply focused on not saying anything stupid. Finally, mercifully, the meal ended. Matteo settled the check with a credit card that had no name on it, and they said their goodbyes. Vincent was waiting with the SUV, but instead of getting in, Matteo gestured down the street. Walk with me. It wasn't really a request, but Emily nodded. They walked along the Fort Point Channel, the water reflecting the city lights like a mirror. The November air was cold, but not brutal, and Matteo had given her his suit jacket without being asked, his coat, again with the coat. Emily wondered if everything in his world came back to symbols and gestures and meanings she didn't understand. You did well tonight, Matteo said after several minutes of silence. I barely said anything. Exactly. You listened, observed, didn't ask questions that would have been dangerous to answer. He glanced at her. You're smarter than you pretend to be. I'm smart enough to know I was at a table with 4 criminals discussing illegal activities. The words came out sharper than Emily intended. Sorry, I didn't mean. Don't apologize for honesty. Matteo stopped walking, turning to face her. Behind him, the Boston skyline glittered. You're right, that's what I am, what they are. I've never pretended otherwise. Then why involve me in it? Why bring me to dinners and introduce me to your associates and make these declarations about protection? Emily's frustration finally boiled over. What do you actually want from me, Matteo? For a long moment he just looked at her. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell that cedar and bergamot cologne she remembered from the storm. The night I gave you my coat, he said quietly. I was coming from a meeting where I'd ordered a man killed. He'd been stealing from me, and in my world, that has only one consequence. I gave the order, watched them take him away, and felt nothing, because I've done it so many times that it's become routine, and I realized that I'd become exactly what my father always warned against, a man so consumed by power that he'd forgotten what it meant to be human. His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek. Emily should have pulled away. She didn't. Then I saw you in that storm, trying so hard to survive, to maintain dignity, even when the world had taken everything from you. And I thought, here's someone real, someone who hasn't been corrupted by this life, someone who might remind me that there's more to existence than violence and control. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone you just met, Emily whispered. I know. It's selfish, but I'm a selfish man, Emily. I take what I want, and I want you in my life, not as a possession, not as an obligation, but as something real. He was so close now that Emily had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she knew this was a pivotal moment. Whatever she said next, whatever she did, would determine the course of everything that came after. I'm not part of your world, she said. No, you're not. That's why I want you there. I can't be your redemption, Matteo. I can't save you from what you are. I'm not asking you to save me. His thumb traced her jawline. I'm asking you to exist, To be yourself. To let me protect you while you rebuild your life. Is that really so terrible? When he put it like that, it sounded almost reasonable, almost normal. But Emily knew better. Nothing about this was normal. She was standing by the Fort Point Channel with a Mafia boss who was touching her like she was precious, who looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd been asking for years. This was dangerous, probably the most dangerous thing she'd ever done, but God help her, she didn't want to walk away. "Okay," she heard herself say, "I'll stay. I'll go to your dinners and wear your dresses and be your whatever this is. But I have conditions." Mateo's lips quirked. "Conditions? I keep my job. I pay my own bills with my own money. The apartment is a loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back eventually. And you don't lie to me. If I ask you about your business, about what you do, you tell me the truth, even if it's ugly." "Those are fair terms," Mateo said. "I accept." "Just like that? Just like that?" He leaned down, and for one heart-stopping moment, Emily thought he was going to kiss her. But he stopped just short, his lips close enough to hers that she could feel his breath. "I told you, Emily. You're mine to protect. That means I give you what you need to feel safe, even if what you need is honesty and independence." Then he pulled back, taking her hand instead. "Come, Vincent is waiting and you have work in the morning." They walked back to the SUV in silence. Emily's mind spun, trying to process what had just happened, what she'd agreed to. She'd made a deal with Matteo De Laurentiis, set boundaries, established terms, and he'd accepted them without argument. Maybe this could work. Maybe she could exist in his orbit without being consumed by it. She almost believed it until they reached her apartment and Matteo walked her to her door. She turned to say goodnight, and he was there, closer than expected, his eyes dark with something that made her pulse race. "One more thing," he said softly. "What?" "Don't make me regret giving you that coat, Emily. Don't make me regret trusting you. Because if you betray that trust—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emily understood perfectly. She was under his protection, but that protection came with expectations, loyalty, discretion, obedience maybe, though he hadn't said that word. She was his, and men like Matteo De Laurentiis didn't let go of what was theirs. "Good night, Emily," he said, stepping back. "Good night, Matteo." She let herself into the apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched the SUV pull away, taillights disappearing into the Boston night. What had she done? What had she agreed to? The coat hung in her closet, silent and heavy with meaning. Emily looked at it for a long moment before getting ready for bed. She'd made her choice. Now she'd have to live with the consequences. Emily has accepted Matteo's world, but on her own terms. Will her conditions hold as she gets deeper into his life? Or will she discover that some bargains have prices you can't see until it's too late? Find out in the final chapter. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll know how this story ends. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Boston like a heavy blanket, bringing snow and ice and the kind of cold that made Emily grateful every day for the warm apartment, the good job, the stability she'd rebuilt. And for Matteo. She saw him twice a week, sometimes 3, dinners, always. Sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at his mansion, where a chef prepared meals that made Emily feel like royalty. He took her to the theater, to gallery openings, to private events where Boston's elite mingled with those who controlled the city from the shadows. She met more of his associates, learned to recognize the hierarchy in his organization, began to understand the complex web of loyalty and fear that kept his empire running. And slowly, against every warning her rational mind screamed, Emily fell for him. It wasn't the money, though she'd be lying if she said the comfort didn't matter. It wasn't the protection, though she slept better, knowing that Matteo's name meant she was untouchable in the city's darker corners. It was the man himself, the glimpses of vulnerability he showed when they were alone, the way he listened when she talked about her day, the careful control that slipped sometimes to reveal something raw beneath. He never pushed her, never demanded more than she was willing to give. Their relationship existed in a strange limbo, more than friends, not quite lovers, though the tension between them grew stronger with every meeting. Then came the night that changed everything. Emily was working late at the dental practice, covering for a colleague who was out sick. It was past 8 when she finally locked up, stepping out into a January night so cold, her breath crystallized immediately. The street was quiet. Most businesses already closed, only a few cars passing by. She didn't notice the van until it pulled up beside her. The door slid open. 2 men jumped out, moving with professional efficiency. Emily opened her mouth to scream, but a hand clamped over her face. Something pressed against her neck, a sting like a needle, and the world went grey at the edges. She fought anyway, kicking and thrashing, but her limbs felt heavy, disconnected. The men lifted her easily, loading her into the van like cargo. The door slammed shut. Emily's last conscious thought, before darkness took her completely, was that she was breaking her promise to Matteo. She'd failed to stay safe. She woke in stages. First came awareness of cold concrete beneath her, then pain, her head throbbing, her neck aching where they'd injected her, then fear, sharp and immediate as memory returned. Emily opened her eyes to a basement. Unfinished concrete walls, exposed pipes overhead, a single bare bulb providing harsh light. She was sitting in a metal chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Her phone was gone. Her coat was gone. She was alone, except for a man standing near the stairs. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore jeans and a leather jacket, and when he saw she was awake, he smiled. "Miss Carter, good. We can begin." Emily's voice came out hoarse. "Who are you?" "My name doesn't matter. What matters is that you belong to Matteo De Laurentiis, and that makes you valuable. Belong." The word sent ice through her veins. "I don't belong to anyone." "That's not what Boston thinks. Everyone knows you're his. That coat he gave you, that was a declaration, and declarations have consequences." The man moved closer, crouching in front of her chair. "See, Matteo's been expanding his territory, taking over operations that used to belong to other families, my family, and we've decided it's time to push back. By kidnapping me." Emily's fear crystallized into anger. "That's your strategy? Kidnapping you is the message. What happens next depends on Matteo." He stood, pulling out a phone. "We've already sent him proof we have you. A photo. Some of your blood. Don't worry, just a little cut. Nothing permanent. He knows you're alive. Now we wait to see what he's willing to pay. He won't negotiate with you. Of course he will, because you're his. And men like Matteo De Laurentiis don't let anyone take what's theirs without consequences." The man headed for the stairs. "Try to relax, Miss Carter. This could take a while." He left, and Emily heard a lock click into place. She was alone. Time became strange in the basement. Minutes or hours passed. Emily couldn't tell. She worked at the zip tie, trying to loosen it, but it was industrial-strength plastic that only cut into her wrists when she pulled. Her shoulders ached from the position. The cold seeped into her bones despite her dress clothes from work. She thought about Matteo, about how he'd warned her not to make him regret his trust, about how she'd promised to stay safe and had failed at the first real test. Would he come for her? Or would he decide she wasn't worth the cost? The man had been wrong about one thing, though. Matteo wouldn't negotiate. She knew that much about him now. He didn't make deals when someone took what was his. He made examples. The question was whether she'd survive long enough to see it. The sound of gunfire answered that question. It started upstairs. 3 shots in quick succession, then shouting, then more gunfire, sustained and professional. Emily heard footsteps running, doors slamming, voices yelling orders in Italian. The building shook with violence happening just above her head, then silence, absolute and terrifying. The basement door opened. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and measured. Emily tensed, not sure if rescue or death was about to descend. Matteo appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He wore dark clothes and had blood on his hands. Whether his or someone else's, Emily couldn't tell. His face was a mask of controlled fury, eyes blazing with something primal as they found her in the chair. For a moment, he just stood there looking at her, taking in the zip tie, the bruises forming on her wrists, the position they'd left her in. His jaw clenched so hard, Emily heard his teeth grind. "Matteo," she whispered. The sound of her voice broke his paralysis. He crossed the basement in 3 strides, pulling a knife from his belt and cutting through the zip tie in one smooth motion. Her hands came free, and immediately he was there, checking her for injuries, his touch gentle despite the violence that had brought him here. "Did they hurt you?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. "No, just scared me. Matteo, I'm sorry. I should have been more careful." "Don't!" He cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Don't apologize. This wasn't your fault. It was theirs, and they've paid for it." Emily didn't ask what that meant. She could see the answer in his expression, in the blood on his clothes. He helped her stand, keeping an arm around her waist when her legs wobbled. Together, they climbed the stairs into what had been a warehouse. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. The men who'd taken her, she assumed, though she tried not to look too closely. Vincent was there, directing other men in suits as they moved through the space with professional efficiency. "Clean it up," Matteo ordered. "I want no trace by morning." "Yes, sir." They walked out into the January night. An SUV was waiting, engine running. Matteo guided Emily into the back seat and climbed in beside her. The door closed, sealing them in warmth and safety. Only then did Emily start to shake. It hit her all at once. The fear she'd been suppressing, the adrenaline crash, the realization of how close she'd come to disappearing forever. Her breath came in gasps and she couldn't make it stop. "Emily!" Matteo pulled her against his chest, wrapping both arms around her. "Breathe. You're safe. I've got you." She buried her face in his shirt, blood-stained but warm and solid, and let herself fall apart. He held her through it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances in Italian she didn't understand, but that soothed anyway. By the time they reached his mansion, Emily had regained some composure. But Matteo didn't take her to her apartment. He took her to his home, to a bedroom on the 3rd floor that was clearly his own, all dark wood and masculine elegance. "You're staying here tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. Emily nodded, too exhausted to argue. He found clean clothes for her, a t-shirt and sweatpants that were comically large but soft and warm. She changed in the bathroom, washed her face, tried to ignore the bruises forming on her wrists. When she emerged, Matteo had changed too, the blood-stained clothes gone, replaced by clean dark pants and a white shirt. He'd been pacing, she realized, wearing a path in the carpet between the window and the door. When he saw her, he stopped. "I should have protected you better," he said. "You did protect me. You came for me. After they'd already taken you. After they'd already hurt you." His hands clenched into fists. "This is why I didn't want to bring you into my world, Emily. This is the cost. You become a target. I knew the risks." "Did you?" He crossed the room, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back. "Did you really understand what it meant when I said you were mine? That every enemy I have would see you as a weakness? That they'd use you to hurt me?" Emily's heart pounded. "Is that what I am, a weakness?" "Yes." The admission seemed torn from him. "The first real weakness I've had in 15 years. And today proved that everyone knows it. Then maybe I should leave. Go somewhere else. You could tell people we're not, whatever we are, anymore." Matteo's laugh was harsh. "It's too late for that. The moment I gave you that coat, I claimed you. And I don't unclaim what's mine, Emily. I'd burn Boston to the ground before I'd let you walk away." The intensity in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Emily felt something else. Heat, want, the recognition of something she'd been denying for months. "What are we?" she whispered. "Really? I don't know," Matteo said. "I've never felt this way about anyone. I don't have words for it." "Try." He stared at her for a long moment. Then his hand came up, cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. "You're the only good thing in my life. The only person who looks at me and sees something other than what I do, what I control, what I can give them. When I'm with you, I remember what it's like to be human, and when I thought I'd lost you tonight—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "I would have killed everyone in that warehouse with my bare hands. I would have torn the city apart, because you're mine, Emily. Mine to protect, mine to care for, mine." The word echoed between them, heavy with meaning. Emily knew she should be afraid, should recognize this for the possessiveness it was, the obsession of a man who took what he wanted and kept it. But all she felt was relief. Because she'd been lying to herself for months, pretending this was just about survival, about comfort, about practical arrangements. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. She was his, and she wanted to be. "Matteo," she said softly, "kiss me." Something flared in his eyes. Surprise, desire, something darker. "If I kiss you, I won't stop there. I know. If I have you, really have you, I'll never let you go. You understand that? You'll be mine completely, not just under my protection, but mine in every way that matters." "I understand," Emily said. And she did. Finally, she understood what he'd been offering all along. Not just safety or comfort, but himself. All of him. The violence and the control and the darkness, but also the vulnerability, the loneliness, the desperate need to be more than what he'd become. Matteo's control shattered. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air and water and everything necessary for survival. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and Emily melted into him, 3 months of tension finally breaking. They fell into his bed together, a tangle of limbs and whispered promises and touches that spoke of ownership and surrender in equal measure. And when he finally claimed her completely, when she wrapped herself around him and gave him everything, Emily knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She belonged to Matteo De Laurentiis now, not just in name or in declaration, but in truth. And surprisingly, devastatingly, she didn't want to go back. Morning came too soon. Emily woke, wrapped in expensive sheets in Matteo's arms, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the city. For a moment, she just lay there, memorizing this feeling, safety, warmth, the steady rhythm of his breathing against her back. Then reality intruded. She'd slept with a Mafia boss, had declared herself his in the most fundamental way. There was no going back from this. No pretending it had been anything other than what it was. "Stop thinking so loud," Matteo murmured against her neck. "I can hear your mind racing. I'm trying to figure out what happens now." "Now?" He pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Now you move in here. Quit that job. You don't need it anymore. Let me take care of you properly." Emily twisted to face him. "No." His eyebrows rose. "No? I told you my conditions when this started. I keep my independence. I pay my own way. Last night doesn't change that." "Last night changes everything," Matteo said. But he was smiling slightly, amused rather than angry. "But fine. Keep your job. Keep your illusion of independence, as long as you understand that you're still mine." "I understand." Emily traced the line of his jaw. "But Matteo, I need you to understand something too. I'm yours because I choose to be. Not because you gave me a coat or an apartment or protection, because I choose you. And that choice means you have to let me be who I am." For a long moment he just looked at her, then he kissed her forehead, gentle and possessive all at once. "Fair enough. As long as you never forget that what's mine, I protect, and I protect fiercely." "I won't forget." They lay there as morning turned to midday, talking about everything and nothing. Eventually, reality demanded attention. Emily had to go to work. Matteo had business to attend to. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by understanding. She was Emily Carter, formerly homeless, currently a dental receptionist, and now, impossibly, inexplicably, the woman who'd claimed the heart of Boston's most dangerous man. He was Matteo De Laurentiis, Mafia boss, criminal, ruthless enforcer of his empire. And somehow, against all odds, he'd found someone who saw past the darkness to the man beneath. It shouldn't have worked. By all logic, by all reason, this was a disaster waiting to happen. But as Emily got dressed and Matteo watched her with possessive pride as Vincent drove her to her apartment, and she saw the coat still hanging in her closet, that symbolic beginning of everything, she realized that sometimes the most illogical things were the ones that mattered most. She'd borrowed a stranger's jacket during a storm and found home in the arms of a monster who'd learned to be human again. 6 months later, Emily stood in Matteo's study, their study now since she'd officially moved into the mansion, looking at a photograph. It showed her on that first night, huddled at the bus stop in the storm, frozen and desperate. She didn't remember Matteo taking it, but apparently he had, from his car before he'd gotten out to give her his coat. "Why do you keep this?" she asked. Matteo came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "To remember that, even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for something good. You were that chance for me, Emily." She leaned back against him, at peace in a way she'd never imagined possible. Outside, Boston sprawled in the summer heat. The city that had almost destroyed her now spread at her feet. She had her job still. Matteo had kept his word about letting her maintain independence. But she also had this, him, a life she'd never dared to dream about. "Any regrets?" Matteo asked quietly. Emily thought about that night in the storm, about the choice to accept the coat, about every decision that had led her here, about falling in love with a man who ruled through fear but held her with gentleness, about the reality that she was now part of a world that operated outside the law, that her safety depended on the reputation of the monster she slept beside. "No," she said honestly, "no regrets. Because sometimes salvation came in unexpected packages. Sometimes the hand that pulled you from the storm belonged to someone the world called a villain. And sometimes, just sometimes, the price of protection was exactly what you'd been looking for all along, a home, a purpose, someone who looked at you like you were the most precious thing in their world. She was his, he was hers. And in the end, that was all that mattered. And that's where Emily's story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. From a desperate woman in a storm to the one person who could reach the heart of Boston's most feared man. Sometimes the most dangerous gambles lead to the greatest rewards. If you loved this story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next emotionally gripping tale. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought. Did Emily make the right choice? What would you have done in her situation? Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the coat that shelters you from the storm comes with strings attached. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept them. Until next time.